It's 1996. A plane takes off from JFK Airport. It explodes minutes later, killing everyone on board. Will we ever know what really happened? What did the investigation find? Keep watching for the details. On July 17, 1996, the doomed Trans World Airlines Flight 800 Boeing 747-131 jetliner was heading from New York City towards Paris, and was scheduled to stop there before continuing on to its final destination in Rome. However, after just 12 minutes, chaos ensued in the sky as an explosion occurred, and several others were heard right after the first one. NBC News reported that the explosion occurred in the evening around 8:30 p.m. Sadly, the plane was destroyed on the spot, and its debris ended up in the Atlantic Ocean close to East Moriches, New York. There were 212 passengers and 18 crew members on the flight. No one survived the horrific incident. The incident was a shock and a tragedy, of course, but since it took place just a couple of days before the 1996 Summer Olympics were supposed to begin in Atlanta, many wondered whether this was an intentional incident that was planned beforehand by forces unseen.
We exchanged our final I love yous, and he told me he'd call me when he got to Paris.
Terrorism was strongly suspected from nearly the moment that TWA Flight 800 crashed. According to CNN, at the time of the crash, the U.S. was already on high alert because of a number of terroristic acts that had taken place a few years before. Additionally, some believe that notorious high-profile figures such as Muammar Gaddafi of Libya and Iraq's Saddam Hussein could have been involved in the incident. Ex-CIA Director and Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta remarked that Gaddafi was a strong suspect because Libya had been linked to an earlier incident involving Pan Am Flight 103 in Scotland, known as the Lockerbie bombing. Panetta has said, the investigation was looking at almost every possibility, including state actors. We were looking at Iraq and Saddam Hussein. We were looking at, the possibility Iran might have played a role in this. There were other theories as well. NBC News reported that another angle explored was a possibility of a missile being fired from a Navy ship. Robert Francis, who is the vice chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, later said it was impossible to get answers in a short period. He recalled, there was no ability to make a determination quickly. We were picking up the wreckage in 130 feet of water. The passengers on board TWA Flight 800 were from all walks of life. Some were students, some were businessmen, others were well-known public figures. According to the Associated Press, actor Joe Mantegna spoke about losing his English teacher from high school, Lois Van Epps, in a crash. He said that she motivated him to pursue acting. He remarked, "Up to that point, I had no more interest in acting than the man in the moon. She was absolutely instrumental and vital to me in being the performer I am today." Another victim of the crash was celebrated French musician Marcel Dadi, who was going back to France after a trip to Nashville. The town administrator for Tenafly, New Jersey, Robert Miller, also lost his life in the crash. And there were also several students from the Montoursville area high school French club on the flight. The local community was left shattered after news of the crash spread, and a pastor told mourners to allow themselves to feel what they needed to feel. He said, "Don't be afraid to cry." The explosion of TWA Flight 800 definitely did not go unnoticed. There were hundreds of people on the ground who looked up just in time to see what happened. According to CNN, there were as many as 755 witnesses who were part of the investigation. Some witnesses were on a boat. One person was in a helicopter. Someone else was on shore. Everyone was stunned by what they saw.
I heard a large clap of thunder and just this huge big fireball, like a fireworks display.
The stories were different, but many did point out that they felt like they saw a flare of fireworks heading in the direction of the jetliner before it exploded. Many assumed that it was a missile or a rocket. ABC News reported one witness spoke about seeing what he thought was a shooting star traveling west to east, coming from the South Shore over Fire Island. Meanwhile, another person who saw the accident said she saw what appeared to be a contrail, which appeared to be coming from an object which was flying toward the plane which she had been watching. A former Navy commander, James Donaldson, said that the sheer number of witnesses who were vouching for the missile theory was something that he found difficult to overlook. He said that one look at the witness reports would make people wonder what really happened. For him, it was hard to ignore that hundreds of people felt like something was awry at the time of the accident. Vincent Termine was a police officer from Long Island, and by 1996, he had already witnessed his share of traumatic incidents. Nothing prepared him for Flight 800. He said in later interviews that he was just getting done with a meal when he noticed a fireball in the sky and assumed it was the sun. However, what he was actually witnessing was TWA Flight 800 exploding. When Termine later found out that a 747 had exploded in the sky, he was shocked. He assumed that it would have been a smaller plane. He said, "I never thought it would be anything on that scale." When Termine realized what the flash was, he immediately contacted the local aviation unit, which sent a helicopter and figured out a way to get to the site of the accident. The police officer shared that looking for bodies was a traumatic experience and left him shaken. Termine said, "That's the worst part. Anytime in police work, you deal with fatalities, but children are always the hardest because they're innocent." Throughout the ordeal, Termine hoped against hope that the team would come across someone who was still alive. They did not. As news of the explosion of TWA Flight 800 spread, families of the victims mourned together at a hotel close to the Kennedy Airport. The fire department of New York's chaplain, Reverend Michael Judge, rushed to the hotel to pray with them and offer support. He held mass and offered condolences and comfort to grieving families. John Seaman, who lost his niece in the crash, said that Judge was very helpful. He got to know the families. He prayed with us. He was a great consolation. Reverend Judge was so committed to the cause that he helped organize a memorial service for the families each year until 2001. He told the families, "Every year that you come here, you make this spot more blessed and more sacred if that's possible." Sadly, a few weeks after this last service, he was killed in the 9/11 terror attacks. According to a report from the New York Times, straight after the accident, 99 bodies were recovered while Navy divers worked for months to look for the others. After the plane hit the water, most of it was submerged deep in the Atlantic Ocean. That meant rescuers had to spend a lot of time tracing victims' bodies. In the end, CNN says it took rescuers about a year to recover all the passengers. That was just the beginning, and investigators had another challenge, identifying the victims. The delay in the process made things harder for those who were waiting to hear about their family members and loved ones from the crash. There were passengers from multiple countries on the flight. Their families were agitated and claimed that the recovery and medical teams weren't doing enough to speed up the process. Medical examiner Charles Wetley stood by his team in countless media appearances and later said, "As far as I'm concerned, my staff did a phenomenal job. I think handling a task of this sort is nothing short of Herculean." According to the New York Times, it took official investigators 4 long years to release their findings. The goal was to understand the TWA Flight 800 crash from every perspective and think about all the possible scenarios that could have caused the explosion. The investigation was believed to be the most exhaustive at that point in the world of commercial aircrafts. Of course, many who sought answers were convinced that not all the details were known or revealed to them, even in the final report. The National Transportation Safety Board ruled the plane exploded on account of, quote, vapors in the center fuel tank that were possibly caused due to a short circuit. The statement didn't please many as they firmly believed that there had to be a better explanation for the accident. According to CNN, the official report was essentially a theory and not definitive because it was impossible to be sure. Meanwhile, the FBI had concluded a year after the crash that it had no links to any criminal activity. In 2000, the National Transportation Safety Board released its last report on the horrific crash of TWA Flight 800 and also came up with new safety recommendations to avoid similar accidents in the future. This was believed to be the most expensive investigation ever undertaken by the National Transportation Safety Board. But despite all the time and resources spent on it, the official conclusion wasn't palatable for many.
We do have some information that there was something in the sky. A number of people have seen it. A number of people have described it very similarly.
The ex-chairman of the National Transportation Safety Board, Robert Francis, said that he was inundated by many messages from those who thought that there was a terrorism angle that was worth delving into further. He said that he chooses to ignore, quote, very insulting emails, asking me when am I going to tell the truth and asking why am I lying. In spite of the fact that many eyewitnesses had insisted that they'd spotted what looked like a missile, Francis was convinced that the official conclusion was the most likely explanation. He said, "We studied if it had been a missile, what would it have done to the fuselage? We had scientists in the desert shooting rockets into old fuselages. We didn't find a single piece of wreckage that would have pointed to that kind of explosion." In 2021, CNN announced that the plane wreckage from TWA Flight 800 would be destroyed completely. The wreckage had been used by students who were studying accident investigations for almost 2 decades. Earlier, while searching for the plane in the Atlantic Ocean, investigators were able to recover over 95% of the aircraft and put together the bits and pieces. The recovered parts were later reconstructed and kept at the National Transportation Safety Board's training center in Ashburn, Virginia. After the center's lease was up, officials made the decision to destroy the plane's wreckage. The organization had promised the victims' family members that the wreckage would only be used to train investigators and would never be put on display for members of the public. A statement from the National Transportation Safety Board made things clear. It read, "To honor this agreement made with the families of the victims of TWA Flight 800, the NTSB will work closely with a federal government contractor to dismantle the reconstruction and destroy the wreckage." The crash left behind scars for many.
I saw the TWA 800 debris burning on the dark Atlantic Ocean, and everything we had planned together started to shatter.
Heidi Snow Siddutter's fiance died in the crash, and she later took it upon herself to come up with a grief counseling and support group for those who have lost their loved ones to tragic plane accidents. The group is called the Aircraft Casualty Emotional Support Services, or ACCESS, and it was based on her own experience. She found some strength after she felt heard and understood at a meeting of families who gathered to mourn the loss of their loved ones who died in the 1988 Pan Am Flight 103 bombing. Also, right after the tragedy, families were given permission by the government to survey the crash sites and observe the rescue efforts from close quarters. They hoped that this would help them come to terms with the accident. A grief counselor who was involved in the process said it was painful for everyone, to say the least. He explained, "It's incomprehensible the grief they are going through. We want to do everything we can to help." John Seaman continues to remember the niece he lost that day, explaining, "I think the passage of time is helpful. It allows some of us to forget a lot of the details. The loved ones are not forgotten. To us, it's all about healing."